Very early, wondering how it is that we meet a morning like this one, an all too familiar morning of another shooting, too many people dying, and then a situation that comes close to home. And how is it that I'm going to preach on greed and bigger barns on a morning like this one? So I decided to check and see what the lectionary, how and what other texts are paired with this morning's gospel of the man who wants to build bigger barns. And I found this from Ecclesiastes 1. And many of you know that there is a genre of literature in the Hebrew Bible known as wisdom. And the wisdom literature kind of rose up in the midst of the people who were still very steeped in more ancient Near East theology, that the good people were going to be blessed and all the bad people were going to suffer. And the writers of wisdom were like, yeah, that's not exactly what's been happening, right? So they started to write. And I found these words that I think help us and then help the preacher to preach the gospel. From Ecclesiastes 1, I am reading verses 12 through 18. I, the teacher, when king over Israel in Jerusalem, applied my mind to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. I saw all the deeds that are done under the sun, and see, all is vanity and chasing after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my mind to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a chasing after wind, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and those who increase knowledge increase sorrow. These are the inspired words of God. And the gospel that is partnered with this text on seeking out knowledge and wisdom in the face of vanity and madness. From Luke 12, verses 13 through 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be the judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produces abundantly, and he thought to himself, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich towards God. These are the inspired words of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I love the story about the woman from Short Hills. Now, you need to know that when I was preaching in Sparta, the woman lived in Maplewood. And when I was in Highland Park, she lived in Princeton. And when I was in Wantage, she lived in Sparta. But I love the story about the woman from Short Hills who dies and goes to heaven, and St. Peter meets her at the gate. They drive through the short hills of heaven, and then into the next town, and then the next, until St. Peter pulls up in front of a small fixer-upper and says, "Welcome home." And the woman from Short Hills says, "Oh, this can't be right." And St. Peter says, "Well, yes, this is all we could build with the money you sent." So I have to tell you that at 8:30, Sharon Burniston was the only one who laughed. Because only preachers like jokes like this one. Like a wrench in the wallet, like the Gospels and the parables of Jesus himself. We are met and forced to look inward about who we are and what we do and make peace with those things. Marianne Williamson, yep, the one who has taken the stage and has provided fascinating sound bites in the Democratic debates, tells a story in her book, A Return to Love, about her driving through, now this is decades ago, a very fancy neighborhood, and says, "Oh, who lives in these houses? Who do they think they are?" Until a friend reminded her, "How do you know that they are not philanthropists? How do you know that they are not missionaries or tithing to their churches? How do we know? And isn't it true that just as Jesus doesn't judge, we are not to judge? Personal business, faith, and finances are a personal matter, and we need, just as we need on a morning like this one, to make peace with God some way, somehow we make peace with who we are and how we live and what we do and our relationship to God. I used to be embarrassed by my pocketbook. It was the largest designer item I had ever owned, and I was really embarrassed when people complimented, "Oh, I love your bag." Somehow, having something so valuable for me at that time seemed in conflict with my faith. But my friends, I want to tell you this morning that I believe that is part of the problem of the gospel. When we isolate verses and take them out of context, or take concepts from one comment that Jesus makes to one guy, we misunderstand how God works, because God works in moments of holy encounter. And God says, Jesus says different things to different people at different times, and so we have to be careful with the scriptures. We have to be careful with the Bible and come to know the God who works in moments, teaches in parables, and asks us the harder questions. The God who is faithful to us and provides all that we need when we are accountable, and perhaps even when we're not. Now, it might seem strange to talk about this problem of the gospel in the context of money. Certainly, we might talk about this idea of the problem of the gospel and talk about slavery or homosexuality or LGBTQ identity concerns. Certainly, we might talk about this problem of the gospel when we talk about women in the pulpit, right? But we, as God's people, have to make peace in our lives with our choices, what we understand, and be responsible with the scriptures. If it's not good news for all people, then it's not the gospel. It's not the good news. Our reading this morning opens with a question. A brother wants Jesus to help him claim what is rightfully his. The brother wants Jesus, the Jesus who preaches that we shouldn't worry about those things, to help him. And Jesus responds, "Who sent me to be the judge?" And I want to shout, well, the Bible tells us that you are the judge. The Bible tells us that you are going to be the one who's going to separate the sheep and the goats. And quite frankly, as a peacemaking prophet, we might assume that you're the broker and mediator of justice in the family system. But that's part of the problem of the gospel. We have to hold these tensions and understand that peacemaking prophet as one who is still speaking today when peace is not what we see, when peace is not what we experience, when it feels like the fear and the anger and the upset and the complexity of all of those issues are just taking over. We have to remember that Jesus is speaking to us now. That Jesus is speaking to us now and saying, be there. Be all right, because my people are going to need to hear a word from you. Jesus' response to the man, this is not his role. He is not the mediator of inheritance disputes, and he continues, as he usually does when faced with a question, as he tells a story, a parable that is not explained fully. It is a parable that we need to wrestle with, need to go deeper with. We need to understand the context. We need to know what exactly is the problem. We need to know before we start quoting Jesus for all people. The rich man's land produces abundantly, and the man is concerned that he's going to need a bigger barn to store his crops for his retirement, where he can eat and drink and be merry. And in this time and place in life when all we see on our Google feed is how we're not going to have enough money for retirement, our backs go up. But this is a man who is focused on the holy trinity of me, myself, and I. His land, his crop, his barns, his gain, his retirement. Storing up crop and grains, not a bad thing in and of itself. In the Genesis story, Joseph interprets a dream of Pharaoh where they are planning to store up grain for times of famine, to care for the least of these, the women and the orphan, the widow and the orphan, the children and the marginalized, those outcast in the day. And Jesus issues a very fair warning about the dangers of greed. And I think we get it, right? Because we've seen it now time and time again, Ponzi scheme after Ponzi scheme, that if we let greed take a foothold, we'll never have enough, never be satisfied, and we'll succumb to less than holy acts. We are blessed to be a blessing. We are blessed to share our blessings. That is how they multiply. That is how they grow. And we need, as God's people, to make peace with how we live and how we give, how we serve, how we grow, how we go deeper into the text, to know the God who meets us too in moments in time. Moments of encounter still. Jesus knows my story, and it is a long and winding road. Just as he knows the story of the man he tells parables to, or this particular parable to. I have a friend from high school I have known since the 6th grade. And while I was living in Dallas, his father, who he idolized, passed away. Shortly thereafter, there was an overdose and a week-long coma. And once he began to recover, we began to journey together a little more closely after a lot of years. And then at my 40th birthday party, he came in with a rather large box. And out of that box came that purse. For 30 years of friendship and never turning away. It was a symbol of status and luxury, but for me, it was a spiritual symbol that life will bring blessing when we're doing the work. That life is going to bring gifts from God and from others when we are sharing our gifts. I am not a proponent of the prosperity gospel, but I am a proponent of living in who we are. Warts and all, worries and all, wrestling with all, wondering and anger with where God is right now, this morning, in this place in Maplewood. And if we are giving generously, serving well and wisely to our churches and our missions and our kids, taking care of those in our midst, I think it might be okay if we have a few nice things. Because we worship God who meets us in the moments where we are, who we are. Turnover definitely helps us to recycle our wares. No question about it. And I also believe that we can reduce the clutter on the shelves of our soul. Give it to God. We can create space to make peace with our understanding of how God works. Not communicated in isolated verses of Scripture or in one story or one idea, but personal encounter with people who are questioning, with people who are in need. Jesus tells another story about a woman who lavishes him with perfume, expensive perfume, while the disciples stand by and rant and rave. What are they doing? Don't they know that money could feed the poor? And he reminds us that it is not our job to judge, but it is our job to go deeper, make space, and come to know the God who works in moments of holy encounter, like the moment that is set before us now, where we break bread and sense God's presence, and we are fed with life-sustaining food.